Welcome to Outside of a Cat, because outside of a cat, a book is a person's best friend, and inside of a cat, it's too dark to read. We make videos about stories. We're here to share book reviews, chat to authors, and dive into the practical side of writing. Everyone gets to write their own stories. My name is James, and my partner in cattery is Jack. What is literature? This question has been asked many times over the centuries. Many things about this question are unclear, and the yes but response is often heard. Yes, there is more to it than the Collins definition. The one thing that is clear about the question, what is literature, is that as often as it has been asked, there has been no clear definition of terms that are able to satisfy all critics and readers. What does become clear is the fact that literature, inverted commas, is ambiguous and fraught with subjectivity. Definitions of the terms involved have been put forward by many dictionaries. The Collins Dictionary gives the following definition. 1. Novels, plays, poetry, and other creative written works are referred to as literature, especially when they are considered to have artistic qualities. 2. The books and articles about a certain subject of study are referred to the literature relating to it. 3. Literature is also written information, usually in the form of leaflets, which is produced by people who want to sell you something or help you by giving you information. Collins, 1987, page 850. There are a number of problems attached to a definition such as this one. The major problem is the fact that it fails to differentiate between literature spelt with an uppercase L and literature spelt with a lowercase l. This is significant because while these two areas are interrelated, they both are very different and the distinctions between them should be made. Literature spelt with an uppercase L, of which the definition of is the subject of this assignment, is that group of texts or works which make up what is referred to as the great canon of literature. Writers of these texts include William Shakespeare, Ben Jonson, and in a contemporary sense, Patrick White, among others. This canon of literature is equatable with the biblical canon in that the texts included have been esteemed highly enough to be put in a category and labelled classics. On a very simplistic level, literature with a lowercase l is a term used to describe words on paper called text. It exists in many and varied forms and includes poetry, novels, and advertisements, examples of which are described in the Collins Dictionary definition quoted above. The status given to lowercase literature is often much lesser than uppercase literature. Certainly, works in this category would not be considered to be in the canon of literature. On a general level, the application of this kind of writing will not traditionally appear in school curriculum, being used as an example of how to write well. The question to be asked then is what qualities within the text make it capital L literature and therefore suitable for inclusion in this canon? Or what is literature as against literature? Or what is capital L literature versus literature with a small l? The case is apparent in the typescript. In asking this question, it would seem best to refer to the origins of the term in order to glean some detail of what it means. One response to this was to define literature as being either fiction or imaginative writing. However, this is inadequate for the very reason that it excludes writers such as Shakespeare, who base most of his work on history. Another word used in the 16th and 17th centuries is novel, to encompass both fact and fiction. It must be noted that authors of these times did not confine themselves to writing either fact or fiction. As Eagleton states, even news reports were hardly to be called factual. One of the important factors to note about texts produced at this time is that classification was made much easier by the fact that there were fewer works being produced. This is due to the fact that opportunities for education were much more limited and the cost factors involved in the production, i.e. printing, were far greater. The 18th century is remarkable because of the Industrial Revolution, which allowed for text to be printed more readily at costs which made the works affordable to more people. Education became available to more people, and thus there were a greater number of texts being produced. At this time, literature's definition would seem to have covered a wide range of styles of works, including fact, fiction, drama, etc. One important facet of the works produced was that they would conform to a strong ideological base which rested on standards upheld by society. The production and classification of Big L literature was based on a class structure maintained through sympathetic writings. A functionalist interpretation of this would assert that literature became a tool to be used in order to bring about a desired result, in this case, social control. This is put in the following way by Eagleton: with the need to incorporate the increasingly powerful but spiritually rather raw middle classes into unity with the aristocracy, to infuse social habits of correct taste and common cultural standards, literature gained a new importance. The term literature itself only started to be used in the late 18th century during what is described as the Romantic period of writing, with a modern sense of the word becoming clear in the 19th century. One reason for the term's development was to describe certain texts which were privileged over others, to assert a value judgment over text being produced. An example of this privileging is to be seen in the notion of the Romantic period, in inverted commas, of the late 18th and 19th centuries, which had the characteristic of narrowing the definition of literature to that which was of the mode of creative imaginative. The movement worked often as a champion of socially progressive causes in reaction via a creative rebellion to the Industrial Revolution. Eagleton suggests that literature appears as one of the few enclaves in which the creative values expunged from the face of the English society by industrial capitalism can be celebrated and affirmed. The 20th century has brought with it other movements, which sought to define what is literature. Certainly the number of ways to approach this definition had grown, as had the diverse range of texts being labelled literature. In Russia, among other places, in 1917, there was the beginning of the modern literary theory. This theory sought to apply to the text a number of perspectives. This group, known as the formalists, applied linguistics and language analysis to the text. They also saw that within the text there were devices which had a defamiliarizing effect on the reader. Difference, the deviation from the norm, became to the point from which the text as literature became understood. Obviously, as with all other attempts to define literature, there were problems with this notion of estranging the text, especially in the light of interpretation of meaning. Eagleton uses the example of the signs and the problems that occur when the signs are read from the perspective of a foreigner or in a literal way. Other perspectives grew out of this movement or began to be applied to literature, such as structuralism, post-structuralism, Marxist theory, and feminist ideology. Each of these brought new understandings of literature which need to be understood because of their significant influence upon modern definitions of literature, both historically and contemporary. Structuralism moves away from the traditional focus on content and instead examines the way the text has been put together, the form and the relationships that these elements have to each other within the text. One structuralist, Northrop Frye, according to Eagleton, was motivated by his perception that criticism, and as such the understanding of literature, was in a, quote, sorry, unscientific mess, and it was a matter of subjective value judgments, unquote. Other moves within literary criticism focused on the ideological basis of literature. For example, Marxism analyzes the text as it relates to existing class structures, and feminist theory examines literature in the light of the awareness of gender-based issues such as feminine equality. Advances in technology and education, both generally speaking and in terms of these ideologies, has led to a proliferation of texts which are significantly different from previous works, yet they still had to be classified. Examples of these works written out of the workers' movement and by women who had previously not been able to be published. When educators such as Hicks and Hutchings, when writing about literary theories, state that we have taken the view that all writing is literature, there is demonstrated a new way of looking at texts and their value. This illustrates the significance of these movements and in so doing it highlights the result this has had on our defining of literature, which is with an uppercase L, which is equally significant. The major factor coming out of this is that questions have been raised as to why should a text be classified as literature with a capital L. What qualities does this text have to make it capital L literature as against this text which is merely literature with a lowercase l? These movements affect our historical analysis of the defining of the canon of literature. What is demonstrated is the subjective value judgments which have privileged one style of writing or one author over another. This results in the question being asked, should we privilege texts over each other into a canon of literature? A post-structuralist response would be that the text should stand on their own and that literature as a classification is an archaic historical term. Thus, it is possible to question the value of a vertical hierarchy of literature and to ask whether, in fact, what has occurred is a false valuation and devaluation of texts. Could Shakespeare, depending on the criteria being used, prove to come under the category of bad literature? The dilemma then is what precludes writing from these perspectives from being called literature with an uppercase L? Uppercase L literature, then, as a concept in the 20th century, is perhaps impossible to define. It is possible to examine the history of literature, as I have attempted to do so, and in doing so to gain what critics have perceived it to be. However, when this is done, the question is still unanswered. It retains its ambiguity. With this in mind, then, it is clear that to make classifications about texts involves a very subjective process of evaluation, which entails the use of a number of different cultural and ideological-based factors. Perhaps what should be happening in modern classification of literature is a discarding of these processes and vertically based hierarchies in order to let the texts exist as entities in their own right. This would include a discarding of the term literature with a capital L, and then, as Eagleton allegorically states, the death of literature may help the lion to awaken. I hope you found that paper interesting. Please like, share and subscribe. It really does help us when you push that button, so give it a smash. And we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.